Today, we're diving into one of the most underrated careers in rock history. A guy who turned his own devastating heartbreak into a commercial empire, while simultaneously fronting one of the world's biggest bands from the back of the stage. Now, haters call him, vanilla, soft. But digging into his catalog, he's anything but ordinary, and this guy can rock. We've got some insane stories to back this up, including the future #1 hit classic the singer refused to put on not one, but two of his own albums because he thought it sucked. But after it soundtracked a box office bomb, it somehow became his first chart topper and a classic altogether. Then there's the deeply personal track that he banned himself from performing live after audiences refused to give it any respect. It's one that caused his ex-wife to flip out on him when he was settling his divorce across radio. And we got a couple urban legends to address here, like how one upbeat pop anthem was secretly telling the story of a ghost who passes on the afterlife so he can stay behind and haunt his lover. Is that what the song's about? Also, the legend about how this singer saw a man who murdered another man and called him out in concert. Let's do it. Hey, music junkies, we're going to get right into today's episode on a legend whose health is sadly declining. We really need to celebrate him while he's still with us. In my opinion, he's one of the most underrated singer-songwriters in history, one of my favorite voices ever. Today, we commit an evolution episode on the great Phil Collins.
Do you like Phil Collins?
We're going to focus on his solo career for this one. 2 songs from each album that define him from his peak period, the 80s. Of course, Phil started out as a drummer with Genesis. In fact, many don't realize he was actually Genesis' 4th drummer by the time he joined in 1970. Rounding out the lineup at that point was keyboardist Tony Banks, bassist and guitarist Mike Rutherford, guitarist Steve Hackett, and lead singer Peter Gabriel. And the band's popularity grew until August of 75. Frontman Peter Gabriel announced his departure from the group at that point, and critics called it the end of Genesis. But in addition to drumming, Phil Collins stepped into the role of lead singer. Like I said, one of the greatest voices ever. After Hackett's departure in 77, Genesis pushed forward as a trio. Collins led the group into the top 20 with Misunderstanding in 1980. And of course, the hits snowballed from there. The 80s were huge for Genesis, with an estimated 25 million records sold just within a few albums. And the band's total albums sold since then has climbed to over 150 million. But those numbers would be just as big for solo Phil Collins. He's also sold over 150 million albums, so the man is a 300 million selling artist, one of only a few in history. The 80s made Phil Collins a commercial juggernaut, though. But as this was all getting started, Phil's personal life was falling apart. Now, he'd met the girl of his dreams, later his nightmares, when they were both just 11 years old in a London drama class, Andrea Bertorelli, or Andy for short, as we'll call her. The two had an on-again, off-again relationship through their teens. The couple got reacquainted in 1974 when Genesis performed in Vancouver, BC, where Andy's family had moved. Now, after seeing her again, Phil fell madly in love with her, and they were married. Phil was just 24 at the time. In their years apart, Andy had given birth to a daughter named Joelle. Phil legally adopted Joelle, and the couple had a son named Simon. However, Phil Collins' unrelenting pace, that took a heavy toll on the marriage, and Andy truly resented him for it. Career always won out over family at that point. It all came to a head in the late 70s when Phil, Tony, and Mike were determined to break into the U.S. mainstream, and Phil would be away on tour in America for the better part of a year. Now, when Phil told Andy, she warned him, if you do that, we're not going to be together this time next year. And in his absence, Andrea had an affair with her house painter. Phil got the news from Andy while on tour. Some say she told him over the phone in a long-distance call. Wanting to save his marriage, Phil temporarily returned home, but all Andy wanted was a divorce. When the tour was over, Phil came home to an empty house, and he was absolutely devastated. It would become the ultimate inspiration for his darkest music and the soundtrack of our lives, some of the most painful songs ever recorded. That's where evolution begins for us, our evolution episode. While still functioning as a vital part of Genesis, Phil Collins released his first solo album in 81, Face Value, and it was a gut punch of an album. As Phil returned to bachelorhood, Genesis took a break with bandmates Mike Rutherford and Tony Banks both turning their attention to solo projects. Alone in an empty house, Phil Collins had little to occupy his attention, really, other than the thoughts of his broken marriage. So he transformed his master bedroom into a makeshift studio, and he began to write like crazy, without any expectations, really. But over the course of a year, Phil Collins stockpiled a batch of songs that would document his failed marriage with painful precision. Ultimately, Phil copied these demos to a cassette and played them for Atlantic's Ahmet Ertegun, the legendary record man, who after hearing them declared, "This is a record." For face value, though, Phil teamed up with co-producer Hugh Padgham, and together they crafted an album that was really filled with so much anger and this sense of betrayal over his broken marriage that it caught everyone off guard. It was a punch in the face. But the thing is, Phil had intended the songs to actually be a marriage-saving message to his ex-wife. He thought that if he was completely open and honest about how he felt, she would reconsider their divorce and just come home. Big mistake. Phil's songs had the opposite effect on Andy. It drove her further away and pissed her off. Phil Collins and Andrea Bertarelli officially divorced in 1980, and Face Value was released shortly afterward on February 13, 1981, the day before Valentine's Day. The album reached #1 in the UK and #7 in the US, selling over 11 million copies on the strengths of songs like I Missed Again, If Leaving Me Is Easy, and In the Air Tonight.
I think I missed again.
That last one, of course, is my Face Value A-side pick, In the Air Tonight. It's a dark, brooding, claustrophobic rock ballad. The flagship track of Phil's solo career for sure. In the Air Tonight made it clear that this new venture was going to be far more than just a side gig along with his day job as lead singer in Genesis. Now, the song was written in 1978 in the wake of Phil's separation from Andrea. As Phil returned to bachelorhood, he had a lot of time on his hands, so he transformed, like I said, his small home into a studio, and he was equipped with a Fender Rhodes electric piano and a Prophecy synthesizer and a rolling drum machine, also an 8-track recorder to get it all down. It was his creative sanctuary. Said Phil, and I quote, "I wasn't even intending on writing a song. I was just fooling around, and I got these chords that I really liked, and the sound, it just sort of created itself. So I turned the microphone on, I started singing, and the lyrics you hear were what I wrote spontaneously with the feeling of that music at the time. It just all came out right then and there." Can you believe it? First take. Phil admits the whole process, it kind of freaked him out. I remember, don't worry. Though he is quite proud of the fact that he sang 99% of those lyrics spontaneously, so when people ask him what the song is really about, he says he doesn't know because he just made it up as he went along. Of course, In the Air Tonight has become famous for two things, really. First, that epic drum fill that you've heard a million times. You and me. And secondly, the urban legend that emerged about the song's origins, which of course falsely claims that Phil wrote the song after witnessing a man refusing to help someone who was drowning. There's so many different versions, but the one that's told most often is that Collins was too far away to help, but he watched as a bystander ignored the victim's cries for help as he drowned. Years later, Collins invited the negligent man to a concert. He sat him in the front row and he sang the drowning lyrics directly to him under a spotlight to expose his guilt in front of everyone. And of course, the myth grew so prevalent that Eminem even retold it in his 2000 hit Stand. But as good a story as it is, one of the ultimate urban legends, Phil has repeatedly debunked it. Now, the booming drum section on In the Air Tonight, that wasn't planned at all. Phil started playing when the moment felt right and just let the instinct take over. And that unique thunderous drum sound was actually the result of a happy accident in the studio. Engineers discovered a reverse talkback circuit on the mixing console, which unexpectedly created the now famous gated reverb effect, giving the drums their massive explosive effect. Although arguments go back and forth about the origin date, it did come about by accident as a result of a new Listen mic feature that was included on a brand new SSL 4000 console. This is the engineer Hugh Padgham was using on a Peter Gabriel 1979 record. That's where it first started. But the circuit featured a compressor and a gate to make hearing the talkback of the artist on the floor a bit easier. But when drummer Phil Collins played while it was on, the unique magic of the feature was revealed. So by pushing the wrong button by mistake, one of the most sampled and replayed drum parts in history happened. In the Air Tonight went to the top 5 in at least 15 different countries. However, in the US, it only reached number 19 on the Hot 100. But of course, it's been streamed hundreds of millions of times, actually over 1 billion streams since then. All right, for the B-side of Face Value, I've got to go with If Leaving Me Is Easy. Believe Me Is Easy was Phil's third single from Face Value in the UK, but was never released as a single in the US. Like pretty much everything else from this period, the song was based on Colin's anger over Andrea leaving him for a painter, decorator.
I knew before you let me know.
He told the Mail on Sunday, one of my favorite songs. It was so simple and yet said so much about how I felt at the time. The track also features Eric Clapton on guitar. Said Phil about that, I play Eric the song, and the thing with Eric is he only plays when he's got something to offer. Plays the guitar part, but Old Soul Hand takes it slow. I was hoping he'd play more, but he says, I didn't want to play. I didn't want to mess it up. Phil famously performed the song on Top of the Pops, and he made a rather bold statement. For that performance, he placed a bucket of paint and a paintbrush on top of his piano. Of course, a direct reference to his wife's affair with the painter.
I read each word that you've sent to me.
That really made her mad. Collins believes she had left him for the guy, and he used the national television broadcast of his most heartbreaking song to mock that new relationship. In her own account, so Andrea described feeling sick and horrified that their private tragedy was being used as public performance art, really. But the story doesn't end there. During his 1985 No Jacket Required tour, Collins became increasingly enraged by audiences who would whoop and whistle during the song's quietest, most vulnerable moments. And so he took the fans' lack of respect as a personal insult. In his classic album's interview, actually, he revealed that he chose to stop performing If Leaving Me Is Easy live entirely because he just couldn't handle the emotional disconnect of people partying while he was essentially having a public breakdown about that failed marriage. He eventually banned himself from playing it altogether, which is sad because it's easily the most heart-wrenching song of the early 80s. Seriously, listen to it. All right, after the success of Face Value, rumors started to swirl that Genesis was breaking up, especially Phil Collins returning from the group with new songs in late 81 for Hello, I Must Be Going, his next album. The name of the album, that didn't do much to quell the speculation. However, in the meantime, Genesis with Collins had released Abacab, the band's first million seller, and they embarked on a lengthy international tour. But only after that tour ended did Phil return to his solo work. Now, in hindsight, there wasn't much to these rumors. I mean, Collins masterfully fronted both Genesis and his own solo career into the 90s, as well as anybody out there. He's really the only one that did that. By the time he started working on Hello, I Must Be Going, Phil hadn't exactly gotten his relationship with Andy out of his system even yet. And in a very real sense, Hello, I Must Be Going was a spiritual sequel to Face Value, round 2 of his marriage misery. Collins said that when he started on the album, he was pretty much out of material. He used most of what he'd written on Face Value and Abacab. However, inspiration struck in the form of his divorce's legal proceedings, and during this time, Phil was getting regular letters from Andy's lawyers demanding a slice of his newfound fortune. Fortune that Phil Collins claimed he didn't really have. It didn't really exist yet. Although Face Value had made big sales, the record company was slow to pay up. Phil admitted he had a quick temper and there was a lot of shouting there. Collins said the last thing he wanted to do was make a second divorce album, but the result was a triple platinum album and a new stockpile of no-holds-barred tracks, songs like my A-side pick, I Don't Care Anymore, which pretty much settled his divorce over the radio, amongst other songs. Hello, I Must Be Going kicks out with a bombastic 5-minute track that was cut down to 4 minutes and 45 seconds for the single version. One of the angriest songs of the 80s. I Don't Care Anymore is a hold nothing back, tell me how you really feel anthem. I mean, for anybody that calls him vanilla, they've never listened to this song. It's a rage fest. This song also serves as a mission statement for the entire album, which is why it makes sense as the lead-off track. It's angry, it's frustrated, it's rage. It's pointed directly at Andrea and the divorce. But it also had to be insanely cathartic for Phil, as he said. It's Collins resigning himself to the fact that things between him and Andy, they really are over. whereas face value was supposed to be a collection of messages to woo Andy back home. Hello, I Must Be Going is Phil Collins telling her to go straight to hell, essentially saying, don't bother, I wouldn't take you back no matter what. It's over, it's a brutal revenge song, and man, it pulls no punches. In the song, he says goodbye to Andy for good, and it doesn't matter what her friends say, it doesn't matter if she drags his name all over the place, as the lyrics say.
My name all over the place, I don't care anymore.
You're not going to catch Phil crying because he just doesn't care. No more. No more. Right?
No more, no more, no more.
Now, in some ways, I Don't Care Anymore is comparable to In the Air Tonight. You know, it's all been a pack of lies. I mean, not only is this song dark in tone, but there are some musical commonalities as well.
Know where you've been, it's all been a pack of lies.
Both, of course, showcase a powerful drum kit and include simplistic synthesizers and guitar riffs. Phil plays every instrument here except for the guitar. If you're keeping tabs, that's Collins on vocals, drums, keyboards, bass pedals, and tambourine. Of course, Daryl Sturmer mans the guitar. But whereas In the Air Tonight declares he'll never forget, all Phil wants to do in I Don't Care Anymore is forget. Forget about the past. This song can be read as his final statement about the former marriage. So how did I Don't Care Anymore do on the charts? Well, here in the US, it barely eked into the Hot 100 at number 39, but years later, it has over 100 million streams across all platforms.
'Cause I just can't win, I don't care anymore.
So my B-side is Don't Let Him Steal Your Heart Away. Such an underrated Phil song.
No, don't let him steal your heart away.
So Phil Collins famously described the difference between his first two albums as a shift in grief. If face value was I'm divorced and miserable, then Hello Must Be Going as I'm going to kick that guy to bits. But you know, Don't Let Him Steal Your Heart Away is actually a bridge between the two albums. It's a leftover track from the miserable sessions that I mentioned from 78 to 79. While the rest of Hello I Must Be Going was characterized by drum frenzied rage, this one was something of a fragile, possessive plea, a desperate attempt to win Andrea back before the anger fully took over. It's kind of out of place on this album.
You can look at him the way you did me and hold him close.
So the song begins like a typical piano ballad, but develops into a full band number. It features Phil and Daryl on guitar and John Giblin on bass and a string ensemble. However, the pretense of caring about her turns out to be pure selfishness. Don't kick me out because he'll dump you anyway. By the time the album was released, Andrea had settled in Canada with her new partner, Mike Fleming. When she heard the songs, she was astonished and very angry. Said Andrea, and I quote, I was trying to get on with my life. When the first album came out, I thought that would be the end of it. When the second one came out, I was just horrified and angry.
But any fool can see you're fooling yourself.
Andy was especially angry about Don't Let Him Steal Your Heart Away. She found it humiliating and remembered phoning Phil and being really irate. But his response was, it's artistic license. All right, so we're already 2 albums into Phil Collins' solo career, but before I jump ahead to album number 3, I got to cover some songs that live outside Phil's solo records. You know, throughout the 80s, Collins had 5 solo hits on other projects. In 1984, from the Against All Odds soundtrack, he had Against All Odds' Take a Look at Me Now, parentheses song.
You coming back to me is against the odds.
That same year, he teamed up with Philip Bailey for Easy Lover on Bailey's Chinese Wall LP. And then in 1985, he duetted with Marilyn Martin on Separate Lives for the White Knight soundtrack. And then in 1988, from the Buster soundtrack, there was A Groovy Kind of Love and Two Hearts. All of these went to number 1. Except for Easy Lover, it went to number 2. Phil was a monster hit maker in the same league as Michael Jackson. In fact, he averaged a hit song every 3 months for almost a decade.
Got a groovy kind of love. Just one mind, you know it too hard.
So in place of a third album here, I'm giving you my A-side and B-side picks for Collins tracks that didn't make it onto his album. Starting with the A-side, Against All Odds. And make no mistake, Against All Odds, Take a Look at Me Now is one of the most heart-wrenching songs of the last 500 years.
What I've got to face.
So Phil actually wrote Against All Odds back in 1979 during the Face Value sessions, and it was originally titled How Can You Just Sit There? Like I said, Phil reluctantly returned to bachelorhood after that first divorce, and he transformed his master bedroom into a studio. And Collins began pulling his dejected thoughts out of the ether. It was effectively that prolonged therapy session that became the first two albums.
'Cause I'll still be standing here.
What Phil Collins would say about Against All Odds is, this song was written during my first divorce. My first wife and the kids had gone, and I was left there alone. The song was written out of an experience as opposed to a what-if song. Here's the thing, though. Phil didn't even like the song, and he completely ignored it when putting together Face Value. Part of the reason it didn't make the cut was because it was competing with another ballad that was called You Know What I Mean. Get this, Phil would say, I wasn't drawn to it initially. I didn't like it. I didn't like it as much as You Know What I Mean for sure, and I thought there was only room for one of those on the album.
Do without you. Know what I mean?
I mean, can you believe that we were this close to never hearing this classic song? And then a year later, when Collins recorded Hello, I Must Be Going, Against All Odds, it was passed over a second time. To Phil, the song was mediocre. It was a throwaway track. But then in December of '82, film director Taylor Hackford came knocking, and he tracked Collins down in Chicago while, Phil was on tour. And he said, can you write a theme song for the film Against All Odds? Collins really didn't have time. But after watching a cut of the film, he remembered, that old unfinished song that was crappy, and he put it out. Against All Odds became his first #1 hit.
And you coming back to me is against all odds.
And even though the movie was a box office bomb, it earned a little over $20 million, and it hasn't really aged well with critics and audiences. That ending part where the song's playing is incredible.
When I stand here taking every breath.
The song, it just has undeniable staying power. It went to #1. It was nominated for an Oscar, for which Phil Collins was not invited to sing. He had to sit in the audience and watch his perfect heartbreak song get sung by a Broadway actress, Anne Reinking. It was pretty bad.
Memory of your face, well, take a look at me now.
But 40 plus years later, Against All Odds is definitely Phil's greatest masterwork. One of the pivotal vocals that defines soul-crushing pain. Nobody sings like Phil Collins. He's uncopyable. He cannot be replicated, that voice.
Is all I can do, and that's what I've got to face.
It is one of the greatest voices in popular music history, especially when it comes to heartbreak. You hear that heart-wrenching plea in his voice in this song better than any song. I'm telling you, Phil, it's a special voice. He's a special artist. There'll never be another Phil Collins.
Turn around and see me cry.
Okay, so for my B-side here, I gotta go with Easy Lover. It's just a classic, one of the biggest duets of the 80s.
Get a hold on you, believe it.
This one came together at the absolute last minute, literally on the final day of recording. Collins was producing Philip Bailey's album Chinese Wall in London. It was supposed to just be sung by Philip Bailey, but he'd invited his good friend bassist Nathan East to fly in for the final 2 weeks of recording. Said Nathan, it was fun because we had 2 weeks of getting to make music together, and the bass player, drummer, love affair was being set up there. I really enjoyed playing with Phil Collins from the very first note. 9 songs were already written and demoed when Nathan East arrived, but as the sessions wound down, Philip Bailey realized he was missing an undeniable single. So turning to Phil Collins, he said, we haven't written anything together on this album. Challenge accepted. Philip Bailey started singing on a bass line, and Phil got behind the kit, and he sat down at the piano and started playing a riff. Then Philip Bailey started fooling around singing a verse about a choosy lover. Choosy Lover became the song's working title, and after a day hammering away at the song, the trio recorded a rough instrumental take before calling it a day. That night, though, Phil Collins finalized the lyrics at home, changing Choosy Lover to Easy Lover. The adjective switch, that was a major improvement, giving the song a completely different vibe. Released in November of 1984, and again, it was just supposed to be a song sung by Philip Bailey, and all of a sudden they started duetting together spontaneously, and it became the hit that we know today.
Before you know it, you'll be on your
All right, when Phil dropped No Jacket Required in 1985, this one blasted him into the stratosphere, putting the likes of Prince and Michael Jackson and Madonna on notice. I mean, Phil was at the top of his game here. The album debuted at #1 in the UK and has spent 7 weeks at #1 on the Billboard 200. No Jacket Required went on to become one of the top 50 best-selling albums ever. Phil chose the title thanks to 2 real-life jacket incidents. The first happened while he and his second wife, Jill, vacationed in the American Virgin Islands. At their hotel's restaurant, the hostess informed Phil that he needed a jacket. And Phil's response, "I haven't got a jacket, mate. I'm on holiday in the Caribbean." A fellow vacationer jokingly said, "Jacket required," and Phil would not forget it. And then not long after that, while touring with Robert Plant, the two stayed at Chicago's Ambassador East Hotel. Plant wore a loud checkered suit while Phil sported a leather jacket and jeans. At the hotel bar, the bartender told Phil that he needed a proper jacket. "You can't wear leather." In Phil's words, "Percy Plant's dressed like Coco the Clown, and he's all right. I'm in a designer leather jacket and I'm lowering the tone." Phil had always hated snobbery, so he called the album No Jacket Required as a way of firing back at those incidents. The album won the 1985 Grammy for Album of the Year and spawned 4 hit singles, including Susudio, Don't Lose My Number, Take Me Home, and my A-side pick, One More Night.
Billy, don't you lose my number. Please give me one more night.
One More Night was one of the most successful pop ballads of the 20th century, but it was actually a failed attempt to copy a Jackson family B-side. It's a song that Phil Collins actually dismissed as having no hook at all, despite it conquering the globe later on. Phil was playing around with a Roland TR-808 drum machine one day, trying to emulate the groove of the Jacksons' 1984 track One More Chance. Said Phil about it, "I had a tempo in my mind. I was thinking of one of those Jackson songs. Actually, when I strung a chorus on it, the line One More Night just fit with what I was playing. The rest of the song was written very quickly after that." Phil didn't think anything of it. He didn't think it was a hit at all. And in fact, he told Randy Jackson, the original writer of the Jacksons track, that he was simply trying to find a similar beat when the chorus just fell out of his mouth. During an interview for the Questlove show, Randy actually recalled Phil admitting the song was a direct, unintentional byproduct of that session. An unintentional/intentional ripoff, right? Phil co-produced One More Night with Hugh Padgham, and together they crafted something that resonated very deeply with listeners. The song captures the hollow feeling of a relationship slipping away, endless hours crying for someone to come back. You know, the tear-filled waiting by the phone, the dread of not knowing whether you should call in case somebody else picks up. That kind of awkward situation. According to Phil, the idea of the song is that many people have been through the experience of dating a girl and getting on very well. Then suddenly you see her with somebody else. You just know that if you had one more night to explain or to show her that you were the right man for the gig, just one more night, you would put everything straight. His words exactly. Of course, One More Night was a #1 smash. It has one of the best bridges of the middle 80s. Phil was always a master at writing great bridges, just like Sting. All right, it was nearly impossible to pick a B-side from No Jacket Required because it's a perfect album. Every song is an A+. But flipping it over to the B-side, I gotta go with one of the great tragedies of the 80s. I'm talking about Inside Out. It's a tragedy because even though No Jacket Required is stacked with iconic offerings, Inside Out was never a single, and I think it would have been another #1 hit for Phil Collins. Such a great song. Truly a hidden gem from the 80s. Now, at the time Phil wrote this one, he was famously happily married to his second wife, Jill. During the writing of No Jacket Required, he was living in a literal divorce bubble, though. In a 1986 Playboy interview, Collins revealed that Inside Out and his sister tracks were born from a bizarre social phenomenon. His manager was getting a divorce. His close friends were all getting divorced, and he was still processing his own first divorce. He described this song as a response to that chaotic feeling that nobody stays together anymore, which is actually the name of one of the songs on No Jacket Required. It made this track a snapshot of a man who was emotionally stable himself but surrounded by a collapsing social circle. Despite never being released as a commercial single in the US, Inside Out became a staple of Phil Collins' live performances during the 80s and 90s, one of his best live tracks. Its structure allows for a dramatic dynamic shift, starting with a relatively restrained verse that explodes into a powerful anthemic chorus. The track is a perfect marriage of 80s production polish and a raw, soul-influenced vocal delivery, and its placement on the album helped balance the record's more radio-friendly hits like Sussudio, providing a necessary layer of grit and urgency, showing the man could rock as hard as anyone. Okay, so moving on to our last one. Earlier I mentioned the Buster soundtrack, and it had 2 number-1 hits, the only 2 singles released from it, Groovy Kinda Love and 2 Hearts. The soundtrack, it dropped in September of '88, almost 3.5 years after No Jacket Required. It would still be another year plus after that before Phil released his 4th solo record, but seriously, almost 5 years between solo albums. I mean, what gives? Compared to Phil's breakneck pace earlier in the decade, it seemed like an eternity. You got to factor in just how massive No Jacket Required was, went 12 times platinum in the US alone, kicked out 4 top 10 singles, the last of which was Take Me Home. That one came out in March of '86. And then Phil was right back with Genesis releasing the album Invisible Touch in the summer of '86. That one went 6 times platinum and scored 5 top 10 singles. Invisible Touch, Throwing It All Away, Into Deep, Land of Confusion, and Tonight, Tonight, Tonight. So then in 1988 came the Buster soundtrack, and then finally by November 20th, 1989, just before the decade ended, Collins dropped his final solo album of the 80s, But Seriously. Now, well aware that he was in danger of oversaturating the market with his own brand of what critics would call vanilla pop. Actually, Phil called it that too as a joke. Phil knew he had to shake things up with this album. So Phil took a long look at the type of songs he'd been releasing in recent years. If his early 80s output was characterized by the scathing divorce, the mid-80s saw Collins being a little bit more soft, but Seriously was undertaken with a new perspective in mind, one that, like the album's title suggests, was more serious. That's what it meant to him. After a year and a half of writing, Phil had more than enough material. Looking at what he had, he called the record the strongest thing he'd released since Face Value. Strong statement there. The 12-track album featured contributions from Daryl Stuermer, Eric Clapton, Steve Winwood, Stephen Bishop, David Crosby, and of course the Phoenix Horns. But Seriously spawned 4 hits and topped the charts on both sides of the Atlantic. Now for my A-side pick, I gotta go with Another Day in Paradise.
'Cause it's another day for you and me in paradise.
All right, so I have to admit, I didn't like Another Day in Paradise when it came out. When I was a kid, my parents, we were a Phil Collins family. My mom and dad both loved Phil. They had all the records. They would buy them the day they came out. I remember when my dad brought home No Jacket Required. I was there buying But Seriously the day it came out. And I just didn't think Another Day in Paradise was that strong. I thought it was the weakest track on the album. The last 10 years, it's changed my mind. That's why it's my A-side pick.
Oh, think twice.
It was just different from what Phil had been doing recently. He even had said that. He wanted to remind people that he was the In the Air Tonight guy, the guy who wasn't afraid to tackle heavy themes, and the theme of Another Day in Paradise was exactly that. It dealt with homelessness, and he took a lot from the critics about even trying to cover it. Phil's told a couple of stories about the creation of the song, and one of them he talks about coming out of a recording studio in London and being approached by a homeless mother. She was asking him for money, a handout. But Phil chose to just keep walking. Said Collins, and I quote, "When it happened, I just walked straight past. I thought, I'm doing the same thing as everybody else, though. I felt awkward." That's what the song deals with. People just sort of starting to pretend that it's not even happening.
Sir, can you help me?
After that interaction, though, Phil began noticing the evidence of homelessness wherever he went, and he had a big change of heart. The other story happened during Genesis's Invisible Touch tour. The band was driving through D.C., and Phil asked the driver about the many cardboard boxes he saw along the sidewalk in the shadow of the Capitol building. The driver replied with just one word: homeless. It really shook Phil. It was winter, and people were sleeping on the grills where the hot air was coming up. All this unexpectedly came back to him as he was working on But Seriously. Said Collins about it, "It began on the piano. When I began, the words, they just came out. I didn't set out to write a song about the homeless. Those were just the words I happened to sing." Now, Another Day in Paradise would be the last single that Phil released in the 80s. It debuted on the Hot 100 at number 43 in November of '89. And 7 weeks later, it was number 1. And it stayed there for 4 weeks. All right, for my last B-side pick, I gotta go with Something Happened on the Way to Heaven. I've always loved this one.
But something happened on the way to heaven.
This one wasn't originally written for But Seriously. Phil co-wrote it with Daryl Sturmer for a very different purpose. The song was meant for the soundtrack of the 1989 comedy The War of the Roses, starring Danny DeVito, Michael Douglas, and Kathleen Turner. A divorce movie.
And Danny DeVito,
Sounds like a fairy tale, doesn't it?
The War of the Roses.
So Phil would say, "I was in LA and Danny DeVito summoned me to his office. He asked me to write a song for a film that he was directing about a battling divorce couple. Why did he think I'd be good for that? I wonder, Phil." He said, "I went away and I wrote Something Happened on the Way to Heaven. But Danny DeVito passed on it, so I just ended up keeping it for But Seriously." Something Happened on the Way to Heaven was Phil's 12th consecutive solo top 10 hit in America. We all remember this one. The song's a desperate plea for a second chance after his relationship that was once so right has now gone so wrong. In it, Phil begs for forgiveness, singing, "I want you back. How many times can I say I'm sorry?" The song captures the frantic realization that he's thrown away a heavenly connection and is now willing to do whatever it takes to get this girl back.
How many times can I say I'm sorry?
But you know what? Maybe we've been getting it wrong all these years. While I was actually digging into this track, I came across an intriguing fan theory that turns Something Happened on the Way to Heaven kind of on its head. It suggests it isn't actually a breakup song at all, but a ghost story. The something that happened in the song was actually that the narrator died. And now refusing to move on, he's become a supernatural stalker who's haunting his lover. This could explain the creepy vibe of lyrics like, "You can run and you can hide, but I'm not leaving unless you come with me." The ghost vows to shadow his love until she finally joins him in death, and his repeated request for her to please believe in me is the desperate attempt to manifest and make earthly contact. I'm not sure that that's what Phil had in mind, but it kind of works, kind of interesting. I don't know. What do you think? Is there anything to it? Tell me in the comments below. Well, there you have it. That is my Phil Collins evolution in the 80s, the solo albums. So his songs were always great. He's just one of the greatest hit makers ever, and again, one of the greatest voices ever. So let's have a great discussion. Let's celebrate Phil while we can. I hope he lives for another 50 years, but it's really sad what's going on. Put him in the frickin' Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. My heavens. All right, let's have a great discussion. Let's celebrate Phil. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.